David, the challenge of doing the podcast from home as I am tonight at this sort of time, 10 to 8 in the evening, is that the children are not quite asleep and they could well interrupt me.
But you did get out of telling the bedtime story, a whole other version of Once Upon a Time tonight.
Absolutely, I did. Mrs. Stone took that one tonight. I'm Mark Stone in Washington, D.C.
And I'm David Blevins, just back from Chicago.
And on the podcast today, the fallout from an extraordinary day in the Middle East as President Trump leads the drive for peace in the region.
We reflect on a day of protests in the Windy City against the president and the National Guard.
And another one of Donald Trump's enemies is charged with a crime. We'll tell you who.
As you know, last night we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. Peace in the Middle East. We secured the release of all of the remaining hostages, and they should be released on Monday or Tuesday.
That was Donald Trump, of course, hosting his cabinet meeting on Thursday at the White House with language that even a week ago would have felt a pretty distant possibility. The first phase of a peace deal between Hamas and Israel, brokered by Donald Trump and ratified by Gulf Arab states. The region itself woke up on Thursday with an unquestionable shift after tens of thousands have died in a bloody and tragic 2-year war. Compromise and agreement, words so hard to find in the Middle East, were found in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt on Wednesday night between the Qataris, the Turks, Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans. And was it in large part down to the man in the Oval Office? It does feel different, David, from a number of angles. I think not least because the president this time just seems determined to push this through.
Trump is certainly different compared to previous US presidents, far from conventional. He also scares the hell out of everyone, to be frank, because he's unpredictable. No one quite knows what he's going to do next, what direction he's going to go in. So is this the Trump effect?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And I think that the Trump effect has many strands. On the podcast yesterday, we spoke to Nadav Ayel, a well-respected Israeli political commentator, a guy who is very well connected in Israel. And he said to me, look, no one else could have done what has been achieved over the past 36 hours ago. I think there will be those who disagree with that. Of course there will. But I think everyone is in agreement that Donald Trump just has this way of doing things, which is wholly unconventional. And in many ways, it does kind of bring results. Long term, peace in Gaza, peace in the Middle East, well, we will see. But short term, there is unquestionable momentum that we've been talking about for days now, and we are seeing it play out in real time.
And I guess Trump's power, that ability to keep everyone on edge, applies to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel just as much as it does to Hamas leaders.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think, like, you know, we talk about the Trump effect having different strands. I mean, one is quite simple. I think it is the case. You know, I've spoken to many Trump watchers over the years. And I think most will agree that Trump's desire, as he so often says, to stop the killing, I think it's genuine. I also think it overrides any ideology that perhaps President Biden had with Israel. Donald Trump is not an ideologue. He is kind of pragmatic. He's kind of black and white, kind of simple in that respect. And I think that's kind of an important fact. I mean, it is the case that he does, on one level, just want to stop the killing. It's also the case that he doesn't get himself bogged down in the history, in the complexity of the region. He kind of just sees it in simple terms and in a deal-making sort of way. He's like, why is everyone killing each other? That is the logic, the simplistic logic he applies to Ukraine, and he is applying it to the Middle East as well. But beyond that, I think what's intriguing is that in a very Trumpian way, he's kind of using this simplicity to kind of reverse engineer the whole process, where others have tried to do things logically. taking one step at a time. He's kind of turned things on its head. So he has recognized, along with those key Middle Eastern advisors, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, that Israel, remember, a vitally close ally of the United States, has become increasingly diplomatically weak. It has been increasingly isolated on the world stage. The administration has clearly recognized, too, that Hamas has been massively diminished. It is no longer a threat to Israel, especially with Iran weakened. And so I think the position Trump has taken was to force Hamas to release all the hostages in one go. And that's what I mean about kind of reverse engineering things. Rather than doing things step by step, he has just said to Hamas, and he's had useful pressure and help from Gulf Arab countries, and we'll come on to that. But he said to Hamas through his intermediaries, you need to release all those hostages in one go. Just weeks ago, that would have been inconceivable. Why would Hamas do such a thing? Well, Trump has told Hamas through the interlocutors that if you release all the hostages in one go, then Israel's justification to continue the war is gone. The war would have to stop. And I think that's been a really important factor in all of this. The other thing Trump has done, as I say, is to forge close relationships with countries like Turkey and the Gulf Arab nations, relationships that were frayed under the Biden administration. So he's kind of got leverage on both sides. He's kept Israel close. The leverage is there with Israel because he knows that Netanyahu is going to have to deal with Trump for the next few years. So he knows that Netanyahu will listen to him. And he has forged closer ties with the Gulf Arab countries, allowing them to put pressure on Hamas. As Nadav Eyal said yesterday, he's calling it a sort of masterstroke of statecraft. It's certainly worked.
Many people, I think, would be astonished to hear us talking about Donald Trump, the pragmatist. But it does take pragmatism to capitalise upon those relationships with those Gulf Arab countries to put pressure on Hamas to agree a deal.
The other thing, David, of course, that sways Donald Trump quite easily is flattery. I mean, you and I have watched that in the Oval Office with many leaders coming through, and increasingly, don't they? They've realised that flattery actually gets them quite a long way, whether it be on tariffs or whatever else.
Yeah, we have seen that diplomatic flattery being used from Keir Starmer and the invitation from the King to just in the past few days, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, describing Trump as a transformative leader. They're all using the right language to tickle his ears.
Yeah, and who can forget Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, describing Donald Trump as daddy. I mean, that will go down in history for sure. Look, I bring up flattery because I was talking to one of the negotiators or someone who has been at the heart of the negotiating process over the past few weeks on Wednesday night. And he gave me a fascinating insight into how he has been advising Hamas to praise Donald Trump, to flutter the feathers of the man in the Oval Office, to help grease the wheels of this deal. And look, who'd have thought that Hamas, that Islamist designated terror group, would be willing to be seen to flatter the president of Big Satan, of the United States of America. But over the course of the past few weeks, maybe months, they have been advised by people who have been trying to get this deal done to do just that, to curry favor with the president, because we all know he can flip fast one way or the other. And to flatter him could just push him to be that little bit more sympathetic, not to Hamas, but to the Palestinian cause, and therefore to put more pressure on Netanyahu. I think it's, a fascinating insight into the sort of conversations that have been taking place behind the scenes to try and get both sides to bridge that divide.
In terms of negotiating tactics, that seems like a masterstroke. Like you say, Mark, Hamas is a hardline terrorist group, and it's one that views America as the embodiment of everything it opposes. Yet Hamas praised Trump in its statement last Friday, commending his efforts to achieve peace. Its endorsement was so explicit that he reposted that statement on his own Truth Social account, word for word. It's astonishing to see this apparent alignment between what is a proscribed terrorist organization and the President of the United States.
Yeah, and I can tell you from a well-placed source that when Hamas saw that Donald Trump had reposted their statement of last Friday, word for word on his Truth Social page, the word that was used to me was flabbergasted. They could not believe that he had just posted their statement there. So that gives you a kind of sense of how both sides have been working each other out to get to the point that we're at now.
So, Mark, I guess there are two obvious questions. What happens next, and why this deal now?
One of those is slightly easier to answer than the other. What next? Well, in Israel, Netanyahu's security cabinet met on Thursday to vote on ratifying the peace plan, and ratify it they did. Israeli hostages are expected to be released, according to Donald Trump, on Monday and or Tuesday. Some Israeli sources have said that it could be even earlier. Palestinian prisoners will then be released from Israeli jails, several thousand of them. Some of them are men, women, and children who had been imprisoned since the October the 7th attacks. Many more of them are actually people who are on life sentences, mostly men who have been held for many, many years. So that will be both sides of the border fence that separates Gaza from Israel proper. There will be remarkable scenes for sure. Meanwhile, Trump is expected in the Middle East over the weekend. He will speak to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, the first president to do so in over 15 years. Some of the hardliners in Netanyahu's government are threatening to dissolve the Israeli parliament over the release of the Palestinian prisoners. That could be the start of a turbulent time for Netanyahu domestically. Remember, his government is propped up by extreme hardliners on the right of politics. One wonders whether a deal has been done in the background to placate them, maybe some form of further annexation in all but name in the West Bank. That would certainly please the extreme hardliners on the right of his party. Maybe he can get them on side by doing something in the West Bank and at the same time pushing through this peace plan for Gaza. So watch that space there. And there will, of course, be scrutiny on the next phase of the peace plan, what it looks like. Trump has already promised that 200 American troops will travel to Israel, not to Gaza, to give support and stability for any peacekeeping force that may eventually go into Gaza itself. I don't think we should expect American troops on the ground in Gaza, probably not even Western troops on the ground in Gaza. But at some stage, if all goes to plan, and this is kind of the what next, if all goes to plan, then the prospect of perhaps a peacekeeping force from a Muslim majority country in Gaza is a reality. And of course, remember, Trump's 20-point plan includes things like the establishment of a technocratic government in Gaza. Cue Tony Blair. We were speaking to quite well-placed sources this morning who themselves had conversations with Tony Blair. And he was the briefing he's giving at the moment, privately at least, is that he doesn't quite know what his role will be, but an important role he will have, I am sure. Trump was asked when he met the Finnish president on Thursday about the prospect of a Palestinian state, self-determination. Have a listen to this, because this is very interesting, hearing an American president talking in these slightly cryptic but interesting terms about the prospect of a Palestinian state.
Thank you, sir. The 19th point of the 20-point plan said that in the future there could be conditions in which the Palestinians might eventually get a state. Under what conditions do you think the Palestinians could have their own state in the future?
We'll look at it at the time. We're going to see how it all goes. And, there's a point at which we may do something that would be a little bit different and maybe very positive for everybody. But we'll be looking at that at the time.
Mr. President.
I think we'll get to that. I think we'll get to that period too. Yeah, please.
Mr. President.
Remarkable, really, when you consider that it was just a couple of weeks ago President Trump was rebuking members of the United Nations for suggesting that America should follow suit, perhaps, and recognise a Palestinian state. We have come so far in such a short space of time. This was the same president who back in February was suggesting that Gaza could become the Riviera of the Middle East.
Yeah, and at that point was talking about deporting all Palestinians, and certainly when he was pushed about whether they should be forcibly deported and whether they'd be allowed back, he was definitely not clear in suggesting that they could be allowed back. So what a long way we have come. On your other question, David, why now? Well, I thought it would be interesting to catch up with someone from the Biden administration to find out why Trump now was able to do what Biden was unable to do. And so just before recording, I caught up with Matthew Miller, was the State Department's spokesperson during the Biden administration. Have a listen to this, just a short clip, but it's interesting to get his sense of what's changed. Matt Miller, thank you very much for talking to us. You and I have spoken. We spoke a lot at the podium when you were in the White House or in the State Department, and we've spoken quite a bit since then as well. What do you make of this deal, of this moment?
It's obviously a huge moment. It is an enormous relief for the hostages and their family members, all of the people inside Gaza who have suffered such unspeakable horrors in the last 2 years of this war. I can't even begin to imagine the relief for both the hostage families and the people in Gaza. And I think what is really important is that we not see a repeat of what happened after the last ceasefire, which is a ceasefire that is short and then leads to a resumption of hostilities and a continuation of the war. All of the parties involved, including, of course, both the Israelis and the various Palestinian factions, but then the Trump administration and others in the region, need to do everything possible to make sure that this ceasefire turns into an actual end to the war.
Now, I know you're a Biden man, but is this Trump's deal?
It is Trump's deal. Of course it is. I mean, of course, fundamentally, it's a deal among the parties and the mediators, but he is the one that pushed this over the line. I think you have to look at where he is. He is at a point of maximum leverage with the prime minister right now. Just a few months ago, he involved the U.S. in a campaign that the Israelis had started to take out or to at least degrade the Iranian nuclear program, something that had been Prime Minister Netanyahu's main political program since he got into public office. It was never the issue of Palestinians. It has always been the Iranian program. He has a united party behind him, which is not true for Democrats who have different opinions on this issue. So he has a united political party behind him in the United States, which is an enormous asset. And he used that leverage effectively with the prime minister. But I think what the important question is going to be is, does he stick with it? Because when he took office, there was a ceasefire that we handed over to him, that his team had been helpful in getting over the line. And it called on the United States to be a guarantor, just as they're supposed to be a guarantor now, and to push the Israelis to get from phase one of the deal to a later phase. And last time they didn't do that. The president and his team kind of walked away. And if they walk away again, there's no reason to think that the hostilities won't resume. And so it's really important that they learn the lessons of the spring when they stood by as the war restarted and do everything possible to keep that from happening this time.
Is it not just bluntly the case that President Trump is a stronger president? He is politically stronger. He is a stronger leader, and that his diplomats are frankly just better than Joe Biden's were?
No, I just don't agree with that. As I said, it is just such a different situation and such a more complicated situation. Everyone likes to reduce things to kind of simple analogies, and I get why. But when you look at President Biden trying to push this across the line when he was in the middle of a re-election campaign that Bibi Netanyahu thought he could wait out, and then when he was a lame duck, remember that he dropped out of the race in the middle of our push for a ceasefire, which reduced his leverage. It would reduce the leverage of any president to get this ceasefire over the line. President Trump is in the first year of his term. That said, I don't think we should forget that we ultimately did get that ceasefire over the line. It took us from May until January. It took us 6-7 months to get it over the line. That's 7 months to get it over the line. That's about where we've been since the last ceasefire broke down in March. It's taken them a long time to get from a resumption of hostilities to this ceasefire. These things are difficult and they take time. And I think what's important is that we're finally here. But there's also a different situation in the region. Israel will now have gotten back all of its hostages. It has weakened Hamas's main backer, the state of Iran. It really has no other objectives to accomplish by continuing to fight in Gaza. And crucially, Hamas is in a much weaker position now than it was back in the spring. So when you look at the two parties who ultimately are the ones that have to decide whether they want to restart hostilities or not, both of them are in a much different position than they were in March when the last ceasefire broke down. So you would hope that we could get to an enduring end to the war, but all of the issues that they have to tackle in the days ahead are difficult. As hard as it was to get to this ceasefire, this really was the easy part. This is what we have seen before, where you have on one hand the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners that have released, an agreement by the IDF to withdraw to agreed upon lines. All of the other questions about who will provide security in Gaza, will Hamas disarm, who will govern Gaza, what will be the role of the Palestinian Authority, to what extent will the Palestinian Authority agree to internal reforms, all of those very sticky, difficult questions that interrelate with each other and are key to getting various parties to chip in things that you need to chip in. None of those have been decided. None of those have been dealt with yet. Those are all kicked to the days ahead, and that they are going to be very difficult issues that ultimately will determine whether this brings a successful end to the war or not.
But isn't it the case that it is Trump's uniqueness, his style of leadership, his character that has driven this deal in a way that Joe Biden couldn't or wouldn't do?
I think it is much more complicated than that. It is certainly true that the president's unique way of operating has its advantages at times. It also has its massive disadvantages that you see play out on the international scene. And I don't think you can tally up the advantages and ignore the disadvantages, but it does have its advantages at times. But he is in such a different political situation now than President Biden was when we were trying to push over a ceasefire in the summer of 2024. The president is in the first year of his term. He is at maximum political leverage with the government of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu knows that he is going to have to deal with Donald Trump for the next 3.5 years. He can't afford to blow him off. He can't afford to ignore him. He also knows that unlike with President Biden, he has no other backstop in U.S. politics. Bibi could push back on things that Biden told him because he knew he had a backstop in the Republican Party. If Bibi were to lose President Trump, he's lost both parties in the United States because the Democratic Party, if you look at current polling, the opinions of voters have drastically moved away from support for certainly this government of Israel, and in some cases really a weakening of support on the entire question of support for Israel itself. And I think fundamentally the difference is when President Biden and the team was pushing for a ceasefire, Bibi knew that last summer, all he had to do was run out the clock and he could get and gamble that Trump would win the election and get to a new situation where he had more backing than he had from Biden and Biden's team. And that just put us in a completely different situation than Trump was in, being at the very beginning of his term. Had we been pushing for that ceasefire, had we been pushing for that ceasefire in the first year of Biden's term versus the last year, it might have been different. But it is important. I think we do have to remember that we ultimately did get that ceasefire over the finish line. It took a long time, but we did get to it.
And don't forget, by the time you listen to this, we will probably know who's won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's due to be announced at 10 a.m. UK time on Friday. We know Trump has been nominated. We don't know if he was nominated early enough to be a contender this year. But I think we can expect to hear his views on the result either way.
I saw a funny meme on online, David, on X. It was an AI-generated image of the Peace Prize being announced, and Donald Trump was standing one side, and Greta Thunberg was standing the other side. And the Nobel Peace Prize committee gives it to Greta Thunberg, and you can imagine Donald Trump's reaction to that. But there we go. So peace in Trump's time, maybe. But David, two things can be true at the same time. He may be bringing this war to an end, but only after America fueled that war with weapons and money for 2 years. And there's an irony beyond, too, because he may well be forging peace abroad, but at home he is so bitterly and deeply divisive, as you saw up close in Chicago over the past 24 hours.
Yes, Chicago is just the latest flashpoint in the battle between Donald Trump and blue states, Democratic states, where he has deployed, or at least attempted to deploy, the National Guard. He says they are needed to protect immigration agents and to fight crime. But Chicago's governor disagrees. He calls it an invasion. J.B. Pritzker says the president is, and these are his words, sowing chaos to justify martial law. And Chicago, from what I could see, is resisting. The prospect of troops on the streets brought people onto the streets, hundreds of them. They walked the full length of Michigan Avenue in the shadow of that city's famous skyline. And we walked with them right down to Trump Hotel, where the name Trump shines in bright white lights, just to hear their thoughts on the president.
Get the hell out of the White House, or we will put you out of the White House.
I'm on this march because I'm concerned the U.S. is slipping away from democracy into authoritarianism.
Do you think President Trump will listen to people like you?
I don't think he listens to anybody.
So what difference do you hope the protest will make then?
Well, I don't know, but doing nothing is not going to do anything. So you got to do something.
Tell me why you've decided to protest today.
Just because it's right. I mean, it's we're humans after all. Seeing all the videos and everything of everybody getting taken from their families, it's just not right.
Yeah, quite the scene. Fascinating report, David, as well. And you all can see it if you go to our YouTube page or the Sky News app as well. We'll put a link to it in the show notes too, because it's a really interesting snapshot of one city and the divide that Donald Trump is causing.
In Washington, the politics can be all-consuming. We've not really come up for air much since Donald Trump returned to the White House. So it does feel important to get out on the ground and hear from real people, not just politicians. Here in Washington, for example, we've had ICE raids, we've had protests, but it felt different in Chicago. The protest was peaceful, but the atmosphere was charged. There was a tension there. It is a city on edge. They were bracing for the possibility of a showdown. And there was a very real sense that this was a city resisting. There's also a very real sense that this is a critical inflection point for American democracy, with lots of constitutional questions being asked about what state leaders are describing as a power grab by the president. We went to Pilsen, where tourists come to take pictures beside the immigration wall. That's a landmark there, a mural celebrating the contribution migrants have made to America. And the Hispanic community told me they were living in fear. I spent a long time talking to one shopkeeper in particular, and he said children are really anxious about the possibility of being separated from their parents if their parents are detained by immigration customs enforcement. And then we went to Broadview, an immigration detention centre in a suburb of Chicago, really at the centre of the current dispute. It's a place where tear gas and pepper spray have been used against, I have to say, just a handful of protesters in recent days. But we found no one there but journalists, just a few reporters and camera crews, and a few local police officers, mainly sitting in their vehicles. There were no troops. There was no apparent need for them from what we could see. No sign of any rebellion or no need for any insurrection act from what we could see. And a short time ago, a federal judge reached a similar conclusion. She said she could see no sign of rebellion at Broadview in particular, and granted a partial block on the administration's deployment of the National Guard in Illinois. She said to send troops to Broadview would increase tensions there.
Yeah, so a victory of sorts for state leaders who have objected to the troop deployments.
Yes, J.B. Pritzker, as I said, has been leading the fight back there. We've talked about him on the podcast before. A piece in the New York Times suggests he is deeply frustrated by the apparent lack of resistance by other Democrats. But the issues in Chicago are giving him a national stage right now, and he's capitalising upon that. When Trump said he should be arrested, for example, the governor said, "Come get me." It feels like Pritzker is positioning himself for a run. He's proud to be considered an enemy of Trump. And speaking of his enemies, remember that list of people he told the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to go after in the Truth Social post a couple of weeks ago? Former FBI Director James Comey, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Californian Senator Adam Schiff.
Shifty Schiff, that's what he calls him.
Well, Comey had already been indicted, and now Letitia James has too. Adam Schiff must be holding his breath. Letitia James has released a statement.
These charges are baseless, and the president's own public statements make clear that his only goal is political retribution at any cost. The president's actions are a grave violation of our constitutional order and have drawn sharp criticism from members of both parties. I'm a proud woman of faith, and I know that faith and fear cannot share the same space. And so today, I'm not fearful. I'm fearless. And as my faith teaches me, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. We will fight these baseless charges aggressively, and my office will continue to fiercely protect New Yorkers and their rights. And I will continue to do my job.
Yeah, I was at the Comey arraignment hearing in Alexandria, Virginia. It was only yesterday, Wednesday morning, but it feels like a long time ago because so much happens that 1 minute I was there, the next minute we were all talking about Gaza. But look, Donald Trump's efforts, which he's putting it out there in plain sight. He wants these people convicted. His efforts to convict his political opponents. It is for the left. Or certainly for those who loathe Donald Trump, it is pretty breathtaking. Now, David, the other major news over here, which is plaguing the president and the country, to be honest, is the government shutdown. It is still going on. I'm interested whether your flights were delayed, because that was certainly the last time there was a shutdown in the last Trump presidency. The point at which it got really serious and everyone got really fed up was when air traffic controllers, who are not getting paid because they're federal employees, they started to not turn up for work. So were you delayed going to Chicago?
No flight delays for us, but my 5-year-old granddaughter, who lives in Rhode Island, had to have her mum take her to school this morning because the bus didn't turn up. And they suspect it's because the bus driver isn't getting paid anymore. Today marks the 10th day of the federal government being shut down because Congress can't agree a budget. And that means, Mark, if you add up the days that this government has not been functioning across Donald Trump's 2 presidential terms, he's seen more days of government shutdown than every single other president in history combined.
Wowzers. Yeah, and it's clearly not sitting well with the general public either. A new poll by the polling company Ipsos in collaboration with Reuters says that 67% of Americans blame Republicans for the shutdown, and the Democrats have an unlikely supporter as well in their fight to keep Obamacare subsidies in exchange for opening up the government. Guess who, David? Our old friend, or Martha's old friend, Marjorie. She isn't happy.
This should not be happening. And I don't think, look, as a member of Congress, we already have a low enough job approval rating. This shutdown is just going to drive everybody's approval rating that much lower.
But so you're putting the blame on the leadership of your party?
Absolutely. We control the House. We control the Senate. We have the White House.
Marjorie Taylor Greene there, of course. Who'd have thought the most MAGA of MAGA Republicans has once again defied Donald Trump?
Mark, if they've lost Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republicans may be more divided than we thought. This is the woman, as you say, who didn't, and I quote, give a crap what our colleague Martha Kellner thought. Well, it sounds like she doesn't give a crap what Donald Trump and her own party leaders think now.
Oh, dear. Marjorie, if you're listening, come and join us. I'm still waiting for the... When Martha Met Marjorie, the rerun, where you can come and sit down in the cozy podcast studio and we can have a good old chat.
I'd pay good money for that, Mark.
David, thanks so much. We'll keep a close eye on all of that over the days ahead, especially as we will await the release of the hostages and the exchange of well over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners.
Yes, plus Donald Trump's imminent visit to the region. Will we get a Trump photo op with released hostages? Let's see.
Yeah, we will be back in your feeds first thing Tuesday morning, maybe before then, to be honest, because there may well be big Middle East news which prompt us to do an extra episode. But do send us all your emails, trump100@sky.uk. And remember, it's the last day that we've got a short survey about the podcast. There's a link in the show notes. It's all about us trying to work out what you want more of, what you want less of, what you like, what you don't like. Because, as you may have already guessed, Trump 100 is quickly becoming Trump 1000. We're not going anywhere. So send us your feedback. We love getting it. But that is it. See you on Tuesday. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.